Thurgood, Peter, our country's probably in the worst shape it's been in since 1968. Maybe you could argue even worse right now in terms of the civil unrest going on in the country. And Donald Trump's 5 months away from a re-election bid. Do you think he can still win? What's his path to victory? Thurgood?
Well, part of the reason I think he can still win is that I've been fearful that he might pull off a surprise re-election victory since he was elected to begin with in 2016. So I'm especially worried that more intervening events are going to distract from the current problems, and that he's going to be provided with a way through these intervening events to escape blame and or claim credit for some success that he only vaguely deserves credit for. I feel as if he has an uncanny ability to, have his relatively transparent devices work to his advantage. It's certainly with his base, and that's part of his strategy, is to turn out his base and hope for the best by suppressing the Democratic vote. So those are my concerns, but I do like the Democrats' position now.
And Peter?
Yeah, I think Steve, his only hope, I think, is that he stokes his white grievance base to an all-time high that generates turnout there, and that if the economy isn't turning around, which I don't believe it will be this fall, he's able to offload it on the Democrats. But without that, I think he's in very, very deep trouble. I mean, his behavior the last few days has been absolutely shameful. And, I think even his most ardent supporters are going to, stick with him. But some of the less hardcore have got to be shaking their heads at his just venal and despicable behavior.
But, in 1968, when Nixon won, obviously as the challenger, he did so in part on a law and order platform. You could have almost heard Richard Nixon being channeled by Donald Trump as he gave that address in the Rose Garden, talking about being the law and order president. Could that work? But how could the sitting president claim he's the one who can fix the country's problems when he's the president when the problems started?
Yeah, I'll say quickly, I actually worked in the Gene McCarthy campaign up in New Hampshire. And I remember the election, very clearly in November. And there was a sense that if you voted for Nixon, it was not going to be the end of the world. He was a mean, miserable guy. But there were aspects of him that you said, meh. But there was such a profound dislike of the war in Vietnam, and that Humphrey had just missed a couple of opportunities to separate himself. This time, we have a miserable economy, an absolutely miserable human being, and there really is a sense, at least among my contemporaries, that this election really is the most important in our lifetime.
Well, it's interesting, following on that, Steve mentioning the Nixon campaign, and he was challenging, in effect, an incumbent in the form of Hubert Humphrey. But you also had one of those arguments which could have sort of a parallel role this time. Nixon was trotting out this argument that he had a secret plan for peace in Southeast Asia. And Trump, of course, that his convention speech in 2016 had his argument that he and only he could resolve all these issues, and he and only he had the ability to understand, comprehend, and provide solutions to the economic challenges. And he's flirting with that kind of an argument now by saying that he's got us on track to somehow recover in Q4 of this year, and he's now promising that next year will be blockbuster. And all he needs to add to that is that next year will be a blockbuster positive year for the economy, if only he can retain power.
Well, you know, it reminded me in his speech in his inauguration, you know, Trump famously or infamously talked about carnage in the streets. I saw somebody say that, oh, they didn't realize that that was a prediction for what would happen.
Yeah, right.
during his presidency. So, you know, along the lines of Trump turning out his base, Trump talking about, you know, vote for him because he's the only one who can save us. There's also suppressing, you know, those who would vote for Biden. And the key voters Biden needs to get are those who voted for Obama in 2012 and voted for Trump in 2016 or didn't vote at all in 2016. And there's a large number of African Americans who voted for Obama who did not vote for Trump. Do you think that that is now not a concern for Biden anymore and he's going to get that African American vote because of everything that's happened from the George Floyd murder onwards, or is there a chance that that those voters will stay home again?
Well, I think he can always, you know, commit a gaffe that's going to throw the African American vote into question for a while. But in the end, they're going to come back and they're going to vote for Joe Biden. And the question is simply in some key states, will the presence of a Democratic governor, for instance, in North Carolina, ensure that the casting of the votes is fair? Is that there will actually be polling places for those who wish to cast their ballots in person, or that there'll be mail-in ballots. In 2016 and more importantly in 2018, the vote was very definitely suppressed in particularly in non-white voting districts where the Republicans controlled the apparatus, and that has to be combated. And I know that you know, Attorney General Holder and others are fighting for ballot access, and I think they're going to be successful this year.
So you think, Thurgood, is it will the Republicans seem to try and do everything they can in terms of not having mail-in ballots or making it more difficult to get those ballots? Is that going to be part of their election strategy, and does it become even more critical now than it was before?
It is becoming more critical to the president's chances, and if he has his way, the party apparatus and at least in certain jurisdictions are going to follow his lead and make it as difficult as possible. The advocacy groups are doing a pretty good job of calling that out early, because it takes a while for those kinds of claims to work their way through the system, through the courts. But there's a lot of preparation that needs to be undertaken, starting actually not just now, but a month or two ago, in terms of the preparation of ballots and absentee ballot processes, mailing processes and envelopes and ballots, as well as voter education. And those are key places where Democratic interests need to play an important role in getting the word out early and making sure that the resources are there and that the resources are adequate to make sure that all those ballots get in and are all counted properly.
And so I'll close on this question. So right now, is the Biden campaign where it wants to be, or does it have something it should be doing more so?
I'm going to defer to Peter entirely on this one.
Well, I think they're where they need to be in terms of polling, which is most polls give them a comfortable lead. But I am very uncomfortable about the mechanics of the campaign so far, and their inability to take 3 or 4 or 5 steps in a row forward without taking a couple of steps backwards. And it just indicates a sloppiness that I don't think is going to that can't be carried forward into prime time.
All right. Well, hopefully next week we'll have some good news, or at least some better news to talk about than the tragic events of the past week. So thanks, guys. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, pretty grim times here in the old United States.